carrying on about Aussie banks and capital adequacy. So yeah, overall we've also got behind that new Basel regulations and potentially need for greater capital adequacy. How will that flow through? Will that have a hit on interest rates and lift interest rates, and then will that discourage more borrowing? I'm unsure as to whether. Well, first of all, there's two things. Will it increase the cost base of banks if there's greater capital adequacy? So, some would argue yes, but others would argue, well, actually, they've already got that kind of capital anyway. It's just a reclassification. I'm not an expert, but regardless, will banks use it as an opportunity to increase interest rates? Possibly. It's a competitive environment. Is it competitive? We've got to wait and see. What I would say on that is that I saw an interesting slide, some research that was done that went back to Egyptian times. It was done by the Kiwi Bank economist. So I'm not sure quite how he got interest rates from that far back, but anyway, take it for what you want. That historically, interest rates have averaged about 5%. And the only reason that they've ever spiked is because a couple of reasons. One of the main ones was when we had a massive baby boom after the war, and that resulted in interest rates spiking really significantly. And so it's closely tied to big population growth spikes. While the population is still growing at the moment, that population growth rate is slowing. So there's evidence out there to suggest actually we're not sure if we're ever going to see interest rates surge back up to that 10% level. And I'm sure, I've always been wrong about interest rates. I've always thought interest rates since the GFC are any time now going to spike back up. So, hey, who knows what's going to be happening? I could be wrong, but I think that's worth considering because, look, we have been in this low interest rate environment for a long time, and there's no real sign. We've seen what the Reserve Bank has done this week in keeping the OCR at 1.75%, I think it is. So not convinced that we're going to see interest rates spike up anytime soon. Probably the slide that a lot of people are interested in, which is talking about some of the prudential legislation changes. And I'm just going to put them all up and we'll just run through them because, okay, first of all, we've seen the LVR requirement reduced. So the Reserve Bank introduced a 40% deposit requirement for investors. That's now eased back to 30%. That sends a signal from the Reserve Bank that they're seeing the risk of the market being overheated easing. They're liking the fact that it's taken the heat out. I think the big thing to remember about this is that this has been in place for a couple of years now in some way, shape or form. So unlike the lead up to the GFC where people were just going gangbusters and could borrow as much as they want and borrow up to 80, 90%, and we even just before the GFC started to see liar loans coming into New Zealand where you could just state your income and make it up just about. That just started to show its face with some non-bank lenders. What's different about the environment at the moment and that leading up to this slowdown, we've had the Reserve Bank essentially forcing investors to have a buffer, so increasing the amount of equity that are in loans taken. So for loans that have been taken down by investors for the last few years, there's much greater levels of equity. So I think they've put some insurance in there, and so that's a healthy thing. So that on its own suggests to me that even if things get a bit tougher, investors as a whole are probably in a position where they can manage their servicing better. Bright line test, 5 years, but we'll come back to capital gains. That's where if you sell within 5 years, you've got to pay tax on the gain. Foreign buyer ban, people say, what's the impact of the foreign buyer ban? Is that, really hit the market in New Zealand? And my question is, well, what percentage of buyers do foreigners make up? And that's sort of usually a pause, and people go, "Oh well." And there's no absolute measure of in New Zealand of the percentage of foreign buyers, and I think it's pretty unfair to turn up to a sales auction room and measure foreign buyers by the colour of people's skin because it's a pretty multicultural country and. The colour of your skin doesn't tell you whether or not you're a New Zealand resident or not. What I'm saying is that there's plenty of immigrants that have come to New Zealand who are New Zealanders that are buying property. So we think it's less than 5%. And that being the case, then it's not going to have a big impact, and we haven't seen it having a big impact. I think it's just a red herring. Borrowing cap, will there be a borrowing cap? Well, it's sort of been introduced already anyway, because the Reserve Bank, from what we understand, have said to the banks, if you don't sort of self-regulate how much you lend to people, we'll bring in some regulation and force you to do it. And is that part of the banks tightening up as well? Probably. And one of the articles I wrote and said, what's driving all of this? Is it Basel? Is it the Australian banks? Is it the borrowing cap? It's probably yes to all of them. The answer to why the banks tightened up on lending, it's probably yes to everything.